look like someone who needs a family too.
December 24th, Denver International Airport. The entire terminal shimmered in soft gold and white lights, garlands hanging from the ceiling, a towering Christmas tree glowing in the center of the main concourse. "Have yourself a merry little Christmas" drifted through the speakers, blending with the murmur of flight announcements and the joyful laughter of families reuniting. People hugged with relief. Children squealed. Couples kissed beneath mistletoe props. The world seemed wrapped in warmth and homecomings. Except for Joshua Reed. Dressed in a crisp black suit, he sat alone in the boarding area near Gate C-22, one leg crossed over the other, a sleek carry-on beside his polished shoes. His coat was folded neatly across his lap, but he made no attempt to remove his gloves. His gaze was fixed somewhere distant, perhaps the tarmac, or perhaps nothing at all. At 32, Joshua was the face of modern tech success. CEO of a startup, recently valued at over $300 million, his life was a constant whirlwind of meetings, acquisitions, and investor calls. GQ had named him one of the most eligible millionaire bachelors of the year. But here, under the soft hum of Christmas melodies, he was just another traveler trying to outrun the holidays. His flight to Hawaii wasn't scheduled to board for another hour. He chose the island simply because it was far and warm. Far from memories, warm enough to forget them. Not far from him, a young woman moved briskly through the crowd, pulling a pink suitcase with one hand and holding the hand of a little girl with the other. The woman had soft blonde hair, curled lightly at the ends, tucked beneath a cream-colored scarf. Her red knit sweater clung to her shoulders like warmth itself. Her face showed signs of fatigue but still held a gentle calm. The girl, no older than 5, clutched a worn-out teddy bear under one arm, her other hand gripping her mother's tightly. She wore a woolen coat with oversized buttons and a bright blue beanie that kept sliding off her head. "Mom," she whispered, "my heart feels cold." Joshua glanced up at the words, puzzled. The mother bent down. "Sweetheart, are you chilly?" "No," the girl said, tapping her chest. "It's cold in here, like lonely cold." They found seats close to Joshua, dropping into them with tired sighs. The little girl sat on the edge, swinging her legs. Suddenly, her teddy bear slipped from her grasp and rolled toward Joshua's feet. Without hesitation, he picked it up. Instead of handing it over carelessly, he brushed a few specks of snow off its ears. Its button eye was loose, and its fur was thinned from years of love. He smiled faintly and turned to return it. But before he could say anything, the little girl looked up at him with wide brown eyes and said clearly, "You look like someone who needs a family too." Joshua froze. The words landed like a snowflake, melting on bare skin. Unexpected, soft, and chilling all at once. He blinked. "Do I?" he asked, voice low and unsure. The girl nodded solemnly. "Because you're sitting like Mommy used to." Her mother gasped quietly. "Emma." She turned to Joshua, embarrassed. "I'm so sorry. She's very honest." He shook his head gently. "No, it's all right. She might be right." The woman smiled apologetically. "Julia Bennett." "Joshua," he replied, extending his hand. They shook. It felt oddly significant. Joshua glanced at the departure board. "Stuck here tonight?" Julia nodded. "Flight got delayed till tomorrow morning. We were trying to make it to Aspen. Emma's grandmother lives there. But it looks like we'll be spending Christmas Eve in the airport." "Any luck with hotels?" he asked. She sighed. "None. Everything nearby is full." There was a moment of silence. Joshua hesitated. Then, carefully, he said, "I rented a furnished apartment near here for the layover. It's got 2 bedrooms. Warm. Quiet. If you and Emma need a safe place to sleep, it's available." Julia's eyes widened. Her hand instinctively reached for her daughter's shoulder. He lifted his hands. "No pressure. I know what it's like to be stranded and alone." She looked at him for a long moment. In that moment, She didn't see a tech mogul or a stranger in a suit. She saw something else, someone tired, kind, and honest. Before she could reply, Emma piped up cheerfully, "I told you, Mommy, he's a good guy." Joshua laughed, the sound surprising even himself. That night, after Julia and Emma had gone to sleep, Joshua remained awake. He sat on the sofa, elbows on his knees, eyes fixed on the frosted window as snow drifted silently outside. The small Christmas tree in the corner glowed faintly, casting soft golden reflections across the floor. For the first time in years, he didn't feel cold inside. Something about the air, maybe the quiet breathing of two people asleep in the next room, had warmed the familiar chill of December. He leaned back, rubbing his hands together. This wasn't the sterile silence of a hotel room or empty apartment. This was different. This was the kind of quiet that came from presence, shared space, shared breath. Joshua's childhood had taught him to expect distance. His parents divorced when he was 10. Christmas had become a split affair, 1 year with Mom, the next with Dad. 2 homes, 2 trees, 2 dinners. Everything doubled, except the part that mattered, being together. By college, he'd made a vow, build something no one could take away. So he built a business. A world of his own making, numbers, data, structure. By 23, his startup had taken off. At 30, it was worth hundreds of millions. Investors lined up. He had the world's respect. But no one asked why he worked through holidays, or why his calendar never included the word home. Then there had been Claire. They met in college. She stayed through the chaos of his early career. For a while, she'd been the one place he could land without feeling like he had to earn it. But once the business exploded, he began to vanish, chasing deals, skipping dinners, missing birthdays. One night, Claire sat on their couch and asked, "Do you love me? Or do you just love knowing someone's waiting when you come back?" He didn't answer. She left the next morning. Since then, love had felt like a liability, something soft in a world that demanded sharp edges. Christmas? Even worse. A season built on fragile dreams and glittering lies. But this year, something was shifting. Joshua reached into his wallet and pulled out an old photo. Faded around the edges, it showed his 8-year-old self between his parents, smiling under a tree. It was the last picture before everything fell apart. Every year, he looked at it on Christmas Eve, then put it away again. Tonight, he looked longer. From the hallway came the soft murmur of Julia's voice, soothing Emma. Then, a laugh, light, warm, like music. He rose and walked quietly to the guest room. Under the blanket, Emma slept against Julia's side, tiny fingers curled into her mother's sweater. Julia's eyes were closed, her face peaceful. He watched them for a long time. What would it feel like to have this? Not wealth, not acclaim, just this kind of belonging? He didn't finish the thought. The next morning, the apartment smelled of toast and eggs. Julia stood in the kitchen, humming softly as sunlight filtered through the curtains. Emma sat at the table, swinging her legs, crayons scattered around her. When Joshua entered, she grinned. "Good morning, sleepyhead." He smiled. "Good morning, Miss Artist." She held up a crayon drawing, 3 stick figures under a Christmas tree. A tall man, a curly-haired woman, and a small girl holding their hands. "I made us," she said proudly. "You and me are not sad anymore." Joshua stared at the picture. On the table beside his plate, a napkin had been folded neatly. In blue ink, Julia had written, "Thank you for your kindness, for being the kind of stranger the world still needs." He folded the napkin and tucked it into his pocket. He didn't know what this was yet, what it would become. But for the first time in years, he wanted it to stay. After saying goodbye at the airport, Joshua never expected to see them again. He returned to Seattle the next morning, diving straight back into his old rhythm: strategy meetings, quarterly projections, investor calls. The city was the same blur of rain and deadlines. And yet, something small had shifted. At night, he found himself thinking about a little girl with big brown eyes and a woman whose smile had felt like warmth after a long winter. He chalked it up to holiday sentiment, nothing more. Weeks passed. Then, on an unexpected business trip to Colorado, his car broke down on a remote mountain road during a surprise snowstorm. The tow truck driver offered a ride to the nearest town. "Just a few miles up ahead," he said. "Maple Hill." Joshua froze at the name. It was the town Julia had mentioned that night, the one they never made it to. He stepped out into the snow, waiting while the car was towed. With hours to kill, he wandered into the heart of Maple Hill, a quiet mountain town blanketed in fresh snow. To his surprise, the town was still wrapped in Christmas. Though it was already January, Maple Hill's annual winter festival was still in full swing, twinkling lights strung across rooftops, a small skating rink at the town square, stalls selling handmade crafts and spiced cider, and a massive Christmas tree that shimmered in the center of it all. Joshua walked slowly, not knowing what he was looking for, until he heard it. A laugh. Small, bright, unforgettable. He turned toward the sound. At a face-painting booth, a little girl with a blue beanie sat giggling as someone painted a snowflake on her cheek. It was Emma. Before he could say anything, she spotted him and lit up. "Mr. Joshua!" she squealed, leaping down and running toward him. She threw her arms around his legs. "I knew you'd find us again." He looked down, stunned, then smiled. "Emma, I think you found me." A few moments later, Julia appeared, stopping mid-step when she saw him. Her mouth parted in surprise, then curled into a disbelieving smile. "Joshua." He nodded. "Hello, Julia." She laughed softly. "What are the odds?" "Apparently pretty good," he said. "My car broke down just outside of town." They stood for a moment, snowflakes drifting between them, something warm passing quietly in the silence. Later, they sat together inside a heated tent with cups of hot cocoa. Emma chatted excitedly, catching him up on everything she had done since Christmas, the sled races, her new school, and how she had learned to make snow angels properly now. The three of them laughed, like no time had passed at all. Julia told him she now worked full-time at the local preschool. Before motherhood, she had illustrated children's books, but had left it behind when life got hard. After her husband's sudden death, she moved to Maple Hill to be closer to her mother, to start fresh, to survive. Joshua listened. He really listened. And something quiet settled into his chest. Later that evening, instead of continuing on to his next destination, he called the mechanic and told him to take his time with the repairs. He rented a small cottage nearby and told himself he needed rest. But the truth was simpler. He wanted more time. He began showing up around town, helping wrap gifts at the community center, assisting with sled rides, volunteering for the hot cocoa stand. People noticed him, not as a CEO, but as a man who laughed easily, who knelt to tie children's scarves, who looked at one woman like she was the only thing holding him to earth. For the first time in years, Joshua felt like himself, not the successful man he had become, but the whole man he had forgotten he could be. On the final night of the festival, the town held an outdoor movie screening. The townspeople gathered with blankets and cider under a sky of falling snow. "It's a Wonderful Life" flickered on the screen. Julia and Joshua sat together in the crowd, Emma curled up in a blanket beside them, asleep before the movie ended. Partway through, Julia leaned her head gently on Joshua's shoulder. She didn't speak. He didn't move. He sat there, still and quiet, as emotions he hadn't dared name swirled inside him, tenderness, longing, fear, and something very close to love. Joshua decided to stay. What began as a brief extension turned into something more. He rented a small cottage just a few blocks from Julia's school, nothing extravagant, just a cozy home with a fireplace, old wooden floors, and a view of Maple Hill's snow-covered hills. He invited Emma over after school, at first just to play games or sip hot cocoa. Then, it became part of their rhythm. Joshua taught her basic piano, simple game coding, and how to make her own paper snowflakes. Julia hesitated at first. She had seen kind gestures fade before, but day after day, she watched Joshua show up, with no expectations, no strings, just presence. He didn't try to impress her. He simply stayed. Sometimes, after Emma had gone to bed, Julia lingered a little longer. They would talk, really talk, by the fireplace or over quiet cups of tea. Joshua opened up about his childhood. How every Christmas had been split between divorced parents, never whole. How he buried himself in work because it was the only thing he could control. How he had come to believe that holidays were just glossy distractions from loneliness. Julia listened. Then, in return, she shared her own story, about cold nights with a feverish baby and no one to call. About letting go of her dream of being a children's illustrator to take a more stable job, about loving hard and losing fast. There were no grand declarations, just two people both shaped by grief, finding soft places to land in one another's company. Then came the day Emma got sick. Julia was exhausted, juggling work and care. Without warning, Joshua showed up at their door. He carried a thermos of warm chicken soup, a bottle of children's medicine, and a newly released picture book Emma had mentioned in passing. He did not stay. He simply smiled, handed everything over, and said, "Tell her I hope she feels better." Julia stood in the doorway long after he left, heart aching. Her late husband had been loving, yes, but never this attentive, never this quietly thoughtful. A week later, without telling Julia, Joshua submitted a sample of her old artwork, illustrations she'd long ago buried in folders, to the creative team at his company. They were launching a new children's interactive book series and looking for artists who could bring emotion and warmth to the screen. The response was immediate. "This artist feels the stories," one director said. Julia received an email from the publishing department, offering her a flexible, remote position to illustrate a series of books, exactly the kind of opportunity she'd once believed no longer possible. She cried when she read the message. She never knew who sent the portfolio. One evening, after the town's Christmas concert, Joshua walked Julia and Emma home under a blanket of snow. Emma skipped ahead, humming the carols they had just sung. Julia walked quietly beside him. The snowflakes sparkled under the lamplight. The town was hushed and peaceful. When they reached her doorstep, she turned to him, cheeks pink from the cold. "I never thought," she began, "that a man who once hated Christmas could become the reason my daughter and I love it again." Joshua didn't answer right away. He didn't need to. He looked at her, really looked, and smiled. And for Julia, that was enough. Life in Maple Hill was beginning to look very different for all three of them. Joshua, once a man of rigid calendars and investor meetings, found himself slowing down, not because he was tired, but because, for the first time, he wanted to. He began spending more time in Maple Hill than in Seattle, letting his team handle the company's day-to-day. Every morning, without fail, he stopped by the preschool where Julia worked. He always brought fresh pastries from the bakery and coffee just the way she liked it, light cream, no sugar. And somehow, each time, he had a little surprise for Emma, too. A sticker sheet, a tiny snow globe, once even a puzzle box in the shape of a reindeer. "It's nothing," he would say, "just passing by." But it was never nothing. Julia noticed the pattern, the quiet consistency. He wasn't trying to win her over with grand gestures. He was simply there, and that presence, steady and kind, began to speak louder than any words. Emma, ever the emotional compass of the group, adored Joshua. She called him her young Santa and told her classmates that he had magic in his jacket pockets. One afternoon, her teacher assigned a short essay. "Write about someone you admire." Emma's response was simple and pure. "I like Mr. Joshua. He looks serious, but he has the warmest heart. He never forgets my favorite cookies, and he makes Mommy smile when she thinks no one's looking." Julia found the paper tucked inside Emma's backpack. She read it 3 times, then sat in silence for a long while, hand pressed over her heart. One snowy evening, Joshua knocked gently on Julia's door. "I have something for you," he said. He handed her a neatly wrapped book, handmade, tied with string. Inside was a collection of sketches, drawings of Emma Julia had created over the years, some from birthday cards, others from old notebooks. Somehow, he had gathered them all. He'd mounted each one on thick, textured paper, dated them, even added little captions based on what he remembered Emma saying at those times. On the inside cover, he'd written, "Some things deserve to be kept in more than a folder. Some belong in the heart." Julia didn't speak. Her eyes welled with tears. He didn't try to explain. He just smiled, gave her a quiet nod, and left her with the gift. Feelings deepened, but slowly, carefully. Julia, though touched, was cautious. She'd loved once and lost suddenly. The idea of opening her heart again terrified her. But Joshua never pushed. Instead, he showed up in small ways. When her fence broke during a storm, he fixed it before she even had to ask. When she got stuck in town one afternoon, he picked up Emma from school without hesitation. He never tried to step in as a father. He just helped. And Julia began to realize, this man wasn't offering her a new life. He was offering to share hers. The town's winter festival returned in full swing that year. Snow blanketed the streets. Lights twinkled from every roof. Julia, Emma, and Joshua walked hand in hand through the market, sipping cider and sampling roasted chestnuts. That evening, a photographer roamed the square, snapping candids of families beneath the lights. The next day, one of the photos was pinned to the community board. Julia saw it while picking up groceries. In it, she, Emma, and Joshua were standing side by side watching a fire dancer. Julia had one hand on Emma's shoulder. Joshua stood close, smiling at them both. They looked like a family. She stood frozen in front of the photo, breath-catching. Not because it was perfect, but because it was true. In that captured moment, she didn't see herself as a single mom. She saw them, together, whole. And for the first time in a very long time, Julia let herself hope. It happened by accident. Julia had come by Joshua's place earlier than usual to drop off a scarf Emma had left behind. She let herself in through the back door, like she often did now, calling out softly, "Just me." She heard his voice before she saw him, on the phone, his tone polished, professional. "Yes, I'll be flying out to San Francisco in 2 weeks. Let's finalize the deal before the new quarter. I'll be based there most of the spring anyway, so I can meet with the full board in person." Julia stopped in her tracks. Her fingers curled around the scarf in her hand. The rest of the conversation was a blur. Numbers, projections, strategy. She backed out quietly, unnoticed. Later that evening, Joshua sat beside her on the porch swing, smiling. "I was thinking, what if you and Emma came to Seattle for Christmas? My house has more rooms than I know what to do with. I could show you the city, maybe even start a few new traditions." Julia hesitated. She looked down at her lap. Then, slowly, she shook her head. "I don't think that's a good idea." His smile faded. "Why not?" She took a breath, steady but sad. "Because Emma needs something steady. She's already lost so much. She doesn't need a man who might be here today and gone tomorrow." His eyes narrowed, confused. "What makes you think I'd disappear?" "I heard your call today," she said quietly. "San Francisco, spring, full board meetings, deals. It sounded permanent." Joshua leaned forward. "Julia, that was about expanding the company, not leaving Maple Hill. I haven't even decided if—" "But you could decide," she cut in. "And that's just it, Joshua. You can leave whenever you want. We can't." He stared at her, stunned. "I let myself believe this meant something," she continued, voice trembling. "But maybe Maple Hill was just a place for you to rest. A quiet stop before you go back to your real life." Joshua stood up, hurt, flashing in his eyes. "That's not fair." "I have to protect her," Julia said, standing too. "Even if it means walking away from something I—" She didn't finish the sentence. She couldn't. And before he could say anything more, she turned and walked inside, leaving him on the porch, the wind biting through his coat like regret. That night, Emma sat on her bed, arms crossed, eyes red. "She thinks she's protecting me," she sniffled. "But I don't need protecting. I finally found someone like Dad, someone kind," and she pushed him away. Julia sat beside her, stroking her daughter's hair, but her chest ached with every word. I don't want you to get hurt, sweetie." Emma looked up. "But what if you're the one hurting us now?" Julia had no answer. Joshua returned to his rental house. It felt colder than ever. The firewood pile untouched, the tree in the corner still bare. He opened the drawer of his desk and pulled out Emma's school essay, the one where she'd written about his warm heart. Then the photo, the one taken at the Winter Lights Festival, where they looked like a family. He stared at them for a long time. Then he reached for a pen and a clean sheet of paper. He wrote slowly, carefully, every word measured and true. "Julia, I don't know if I can be the perfect father or the perfect partner. But I know this, I'm not going anywhere. Not unless you ask me to. These weeks with you and Emma have changed me. I came here running from everything I thought I did not need, but it turns out all I ever wanted was what I found in Maple Hill, with you. Please don't shut the door on something that feels this real. I will stay, if you'll let me, Joshua." He folded the letter, slipped it into an envelope, and placed it gently outside Julia's door. Then he walked back to his cold, quiet house, and waited. The letter arrived 2 days after the silence began. Julia found it in the mailbox, wedged between grocery coupons and an overdue electricity bill. She might have overlooked it entirely if Emma had not spotted the familiar handwriting on the envelope and gasped. "It's from him," Emma said softly. Julia's fingers closed around the paper, her breath catching. She hesitated, tracing her name with her thumb. Something warm and heavy settled in her chest at the same time. Before she could open it, Emma grabbed the envelope and ran inside. "You have to read it now, Mom." Snow drifted gently outside as Julia followed her into the house. They sat at the kitchen table. Emma stood close, eyes wide, barely breathing. Julia unfolded the letter. She read it once, then again, more slowly. Her eyes filled before she reached the end. Tucked beneath the letter was another sheet, a drawing. Uneven lines, clearly done by hand. A little girl with wild curls hugged a tall man beneath a Christmas tree. The figures were simple, almost childlike. Between them stood a woman. Julia pressed the drawing to her chest, her heart pounding with something terrifying and beautiful all at once. The next morning, she called the school. "I need time off," she said. "It's something I have to do." That night, she and Emma stood at the Maple Hill bus station under a steel gray sky. Emma carried her favorite backpack, and the old teddy bear Joshua had once returned to her. "I'm giving this back," Emma said. "It belongs where the family is." The bus pulled away, headlights cutting through falling snow. They rode quietly, fingers intertwined. Halfway through the trip, Julia whispered, "Are you sure about this?" Emma leaned against her shoulder. "Are you?" Julia didn't answer, but she smiled. They arrived in Seattle the next morning. The cold was sharper, the snow heavier, but Julia barely noticed. She knew the address by heart. The house sat on a quiet, tree-lined street, blanketed in white. Warm light glowed behind the windows. They stepped onto the porch. Before Julia could knock, the door opened. Joshua stood there, sleeves rolled up, a box of ornaments in his hands. His eyes widened, then softened. He didn't speak. "I didn't come because I'm sure," Julia said, her voice trembling. "I came because I couldn't stay away." Joshua set the ornaments down. Emma stepped forward and placed the teddy bear in his hands. "I told her you'd still be here." Joshua knelt and met her gaze. "I always will be." He stood and looked at Julia. She didn't move. So he did. He crossed the space between them and pulled her into his arms. No words, no questions, just warmth. Emma wrapped her arms around them both. Behind them, the room glowed with candlelight. A Christmas tree shimmered in the corner. The table was set for 3. No promises yet. No declarations. Only the quiet certainty of belonging. And as snow fell softly outside, Julia understood something at last. She had not chosen safety. She had chosen love. 1 year later, Joshua's house no longer echoed with silence. It was full of music, of laughter, of the scent of cinnamon and vanilla drifting from the kitchen. Every room held signs of life. A crayon drawing taped to the fridge. Tiny shoes scattered near the door. A snowman built slightly lopsided on the front lawn, proudly wearing Joshua's old scarf. The once pristine floors now bore the soft evidence of a little girl's footsteps, and the warmth of a woman who painted joy into the corners of every day. Julia sat by the fireplace that afternoon, surrounded by neighborhood children. Paints and glitter were everywhere, brushes stuck into mugs of water, giggles bouncing off the walls. She was showing the kids how to draw Santa's sleigh in motion. Her hands moved with grace and ease, the hands of an artist who had finally found her way back to her craft. Outside, Emma raced around the Christmas tree in the yard, bundled in a red coat and white earmuffs, laughing as snowflakes caught in her curls. She shouted through the open window, "Mom, I told the tree we're a real family now." Julia smiled and looked up. Did it answer back? Sort of. It twinkled at me. Inside, Joshua chuckled as he passed by the doorway, holding a tray of cookies fresh from the oven. He winked at Julia, and she smiled that soft, knowing smile that had changed his life. That evening, the entire town gathered at Maple Hill's annual Winter Gala, a tradition held in the town square beneath the stars. The snow was falling gently. Strings of lights glowed overhead. A giant outdoor screen had been set up, playing classic holiday films. Blankets and mugs of hot cider were passed around. Children cuddled in their parents' laps. As the movie neared its end, the family stone flickering on the screen, a quiet buzz moved through the crowd. And then, during the final scene, where the family comes back together, forgiveness in their eyes, Joshua stood up and turned to Julia. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something small. Then, with a smile, he knelt on one knee. The crowd gasped. Even the movie faded from view in that moment. Joshua looked up at her, his eyes steady and filled with something deeper than any speech could hold. "I'm not sure there's a better wish to make this Christmas," he said, his voice low but clear, "than asking you to say yes." He held out the box. Julia opened it slowly and laughed softly, then gasped. Inside wasn't just a ring. It was Emma's old teddy bear, cleaned and stitched, wearing a tiny ribbon around its neck. The ribbon held the ring. Julia covered her mouth. Joshua added, "Emma said she wanted to be part of this too, so technically, the bear asked first." Laughter bubbled up through her tears. Joshua stood, holding her hands now, snow landing on his dark curls. "I want this life with you. I want to decorate trees with you, bake cookies, get paint on my shirts. I want everything, Julia, if you'll let me." She nodded, unable to speak at first, then whispered, "Yes, yes." Cheers erupted around them. Applause, laughter, Emma's voice the loudest of all. "Finally, we're really a family now." Julia pulled him into a tight embrace. Emma ran up, arms wide, hugging them both. The three of them stood together, holding on as snow fell around them, the lights twinkling like stars above the tree. In the final scene, they stood beneath the giant Christmas tree in the town square. Julia, Joshua, and Emma, hand in hand, surrounded by their neighbors, their friends, their future. Snow drifted down like confetti. And for the first time in years, no one was running. No one was holding back. There was only warmth, and a home, and love that had found its way, gently, through the snow. Sometimes, love doesn't arrive with grand gestures or perfect timing. It shows up quietly, like a warm cup of cocoa on a cold night, or a child's innocent words that melt even the loneliest heart. Joshua, Julia, and little Emma remind us that healing takes time, but connection can happen when we least expect it, if we're brave enough to open the door. This story is a beautiful reminder that family isn't always about blood. It's about showing up, staying through the storms, and choosing each other, over and over again. In a world that often rushes past kindness, may we all slow down long enough to recognize love when it finds us. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe and hit the hype button to support the Soul Stirring Stories channel. Your support helps us continue sharing stories that heal, inspire, and remind us of the beauty in being human.